right, so we're going to be talking about goal setting and delegation. Now we have the slides where you can watch as we go along. Feel free throughout this to use the chat box to ask questions. More than happy to answer those questions as we go. So we're going to be looking at goal setting and also delegation and why or how these can help you to basically help your team achieve more. We're going to look also at the reasons why people don't necessarily set goals or use delegation and the cost of not using those in terms of our performance, either as an organisation or just a team. And then we're going to look at a couple of strategies to help improve that performance around you goal setting and also doing delegation. So I love quotes. So let's have a look at this one. Arriving at one goal is the starting point to another. So one of the things we learn about goal setting is that it often is, well, it's something that doesn't stop. So my husband and I have been running our company for 21 years now, and we use goal setting. We also delegate on a regular basis. And we've found that both of these tools have really helped keep not just us, but our team also focused on what's really important. One of the great things is when we do goal setting well and when we are able to delegate as well, people are focused, people are able to increase their skills, because when we delegate, we're actually helping people to grow as well. And when it's done effectively, it motivates people as well. So there's a lot of good reasons to grow these two skills. So I'm curious, and I'd love for you to use the chat box. What were you hoping to learn out of today's webinar? Was there anything specific that you were hoping to get out of today's, or you just were hoping to learn or confirm that what you're doing is good? I really don't mind. I know sometimes when I run these, people, particularly with delegations, they get a bit nervous. Am I doing it right? You know, is there ways to improve it? With goal setting, one of the things some of our clients have been talking about recently is, well, with all this disruption, you know, how good is it to set goals? How effective are they going to be? Thank you, Russell. Beautiful. Looking to get some best practice. Beautiful. You've got some big projects coming up. Excellent. And welcome too. Good to see you. So let's move on to talk about goal setting and delegation. And as I said, feel free to use the chat box as we go. I'm more than happy. And Carol, thank you. Just overall improving your performance as you've started a new role. Oh, congratulations on the new role too. That's beautiful. In terms of goal setting, it's really, we're setting goals to try and identify where do we utilise the resources of this organisation so that people aren't just doing the scattergun approach and some people are off in this direction and some people are off in this direction and we're not actually achieving what we want. My husband Graham often talks about a thing called shiny objectitis. When we have goals, it's pretty easy to see what we should be focusing on. Where we don't have them, or maybe people aren't so aware of them, people tend to get what he calls shiny objectitis, which is literally people start going, oh, shiny over there. And then the next minute, oh, shiny over there. And I've worked with some organisations where this happens with the leadership team. And when that happens, the teams below them get totally confused because it's like, well, I thought we were going this way and you sort of said we were going this way, but now it appears we're going this way. And that causes loss of time, loss of energy, engagement, and it costs us because when we lose time, that means dollars that are lost. And when we're spreading our focus too wide, we actually are less likely to achieve very much at all. There's a lovely saying, if you chase two rabbits, you generally catch none. And part of goal setting is to say, okay, with whatever the resources that we have, what's the best way to use those resources? So if you have, say, 3 goals or 5 goals for your team, then and you share those with your team, then your team sort of knows, okay, this is what I should be focusing on. And if they're asked to do something that is none of these, they've sort of got some guide as to, why am I doing this? I don't understand, given these are the goals, this doesn't seem to connect with these goals at all. Even during disruption, goals are still effective. And I'll come back to that in a second. Now, delegation is a way that we basically assign responsibility and also authority to someone else so that they can do the work that needs to be done. When we don't learn to delegate, we are probably wasting our time and also the resources of our organisation. So if I'm really good at doing something and someone else in my team can do that just as well or nearly as well as I can, the moment I start to delegate and they can do that well, I've bought back time. And when I buy back time, I also buy back some of my energy. And if you think as we rise up in an organisation, we need to go from more operational focus to more strategic focused. And if you're unable to delegate, then you're going to get stuck in the weeds. You're going to be part of that operational when really the value add that you should be giving to your organisation is much more in that strategic level. So some things to think about in terms of goal setting. With disruption at the moment, we use a process in our business, and we've been using it for a number of years, which is based on a model that Google uses, LinkedIn, a whole stack of social media companies that are growing at rapid rates. And this particular model is really good because it allows you to scale quite quickly. It is one that comes from a book, and I'm just going to put this in the chat box. I can't talk and type at the same time. I'm not good at multitasking. So the book is Measure What Matters by John Doerr. And he also has a TED talk around this. So he was saying this particular method he uses, which I'll explain to you, they started using with Google when it was just the two guys who started it and they were working in their garage. And it has allowed them through many iterations and a number of years to be able to scale that company to a massive level. The lovely thing is it is also flexible, so we don't need to be in the same room to be able to utilize that particular method. And really what this method is, and I'll share it with you now, is that they recognize that a lot of businesses do an annual strategic plan, or they might do a 3-year strategic plan. And then the idea is that those priorities, those strategic priorities, are supposed to cascade down to the various areas within the organisation, and they map how they support those strategic priorities. One of the things that this particular method realises is that the world and the environment around our organisations is changing rapidly. So what they do is they have annual priorities, and then each quarter the teams come back to look at, has the environment around us changed? And if it has, which at the moment absolutely the answer would be yes, do some of those priorities which were important last quarter, are they now the most important priorities? So sometimes we see some changes in those priorities because of what's going on in the environment around us. Now, what that does is move resources from what was the top 5 priorities, for argument's sake, to what now will be the newer top 5. So, for example, using this method, and this literally happened to us in our business, COVID happened middle of March for us. We run our quarterly planning a month before the end of the quarter. So everyone can sort of wind up and finish off their quarterly priorities. They've got a month to do that after the quarterly priority new meeting. And so we held our team meeting on the first week in March. We determined our priorities, and one of the things we could see was that there was some disruption happening. So we went, okay, maybe we need to focus a bit more on online, need to focus a little bit more on doing e-learning and stuff like that. And our team identified this. So we brought our team together and said, what's going on in the environment? What are you seeing? And because we've got quite a diverse team, they picked up stuff where we went, actually, that's something that is coming up. And we could see that things were starting to change with some of our networks overseas, because we deal with companies all over the world. And so we sort of went, okay, we need to be really mindful of COVID, and we probably are going to be doing more stuff online. And so we then changed our priorities for the second quarter of this year to take advantage or be able to see the possibilities that if we hadn't done that plan in March, we may have been a bit blindsided. So it allowed us to get a bit of a heads up on where things were tracking, particularly in our industry and for our business. So one of the things I like about John Doerr's method, and it's called OKRs, which is Objectives and Key Results. What this method does is it frequently is checking what's going on in the environment. It is looking at what our strengths, our weaknesses are, and it is also looking at the trends. And by looking at those regularly, you're able to identify opportunities that if you're doing that every, say, 3 months and your competitors are doing it every 6 months or every just once a year, you're going to spot those opportunities. You're also going to spot those risks or threats much sooner. Now, for us, we did our last one, not this Friday, the one before, and we did it virtually. So we've got some team in Melbourne that are in lockdown. We've got some team in Canberra, and plus we live on a farm in the middle of Gundagai. So we did the whole thing virtually, and it took us 2 hours to do that quarterly update. And that's just changed our focus slightly because things are starting to change again throughout the economy, etc. So the approach is like this, and I'll take you through it. It is looking at what have we achieved, and we look at the quarterly achievements and celebrate them with our team. And then we look at what's going on in the environment around us. And we look at our strengths as a team, our weaknesses as our team, and because we've done the environmental scan, we pick those up as what are the trends we're seeing in the environment around us. From that, we pick in each of those categories the top 3, and then we work out, okay, if we've got 5 main priorities we want to focus on for the quarter, which of those that we've marked is the top 3 priorities in those areas are most important for us to focus on. And the whole team gets to pick. The beautiful thing is, and we've got from baby boomers all the way through to millennials in our team, it gets everyone on the same page as to what our priorities are, how they were determined, and because everyone's had a say in it, they actually take accountability for them straight up. Now, what we do from that is we use a program which lists out the tasks we do each week and how they relate to those priorities. And that particular program has made our life so much easier. And then we check in every Monday, how's everyone going? Now, obviously we talk between them, but that's a really simple way for 2 hours every quarter, great investment of everyone's time to get everyone on the same page. So we're not leaking resources with people being distracted on stuff that has nothing to do with our priorities. The delegation bit is so important because if we want to grow an organisation, we need to grow ourselves first. So if we're moving towards leadership, we need to be stepping away from the operational and far more into that strategic space. When we learn to do delegation well, that helps us do that. Now, some of the reasons people don't tend to like delegating and goal setting. For example, people are just not sure how to do it. What's the best method? Sometimes people say, oh, it's going to take too much time. Sometimes people don't want to do them because maybe they feel like they're going to lose control, power. The too much time is often, oh, we just don't have time to do that. My take on that is you don't have time not to do it, because if people aren't on the same page with the goals, then you're losing resources, which at the moment, I don't think any business can afford to do. Sometimes people are a bit scared about making choices as to what's the right goal or goals. And you're only really going to know in hindsight. So it's better with the data you've got to make that decision and move forward. And sometimes you'll start moving forward and then go, yeah, that's not the right one. It's okay then to change it, but at least make a decision. When we are fearful, which a lot of people have been during disruption, our brain doesn't want to make decisions because it chews energy. The lovely thing about once you've got those goals set is we can just focus on how do we achieve them. So short pain, making those decisions, hopefully for long-term gain. The other thing is, with the environment changing so rapidly, are those goals going to become irrelevant quickly? And they may. However, if we don't at least decide and start taking action, we're not going to know. And if you look at organisations at the moment, the organisations that are getting ahead often are able to pivot pretty quickly, which means they've not got that slow decision-making process. They're able to identify this isn't working quickly and move on to something that is. In terms of delegation, some of the reasons I often hear that people don't delegate, they're nervous that they're good at doing that thing and they're nervous the other person's not necessarily going to be as good as them. They're also, sometimes some people are micromanagers, and so that fear of losing control can certainly stop people doing it. And a big one for me, I think, is the trust side of things. However, if we don't delegate, our people are going to be quite stagnant. They're not going to be learning new skills, and you're also holding your progress back because you still have to do stuff that you're good at. And when you free up that time by delegating, you get back and you can move to that strategic level. There's a lovely question, which we'll look at a little bit later on, around when do you know that you can delegate something? So I'll come to that fairly shortly. Just want to check in with your experiences. Why don't people goal set? Why don't they like to delegate? And this is not necessarily you, it's just you've observed people not doing those things. What are their main reasons? Did you see when I wrote up in the chat box, measure what matters? Because I've just sent it to all panelists. I didn't send it to everyone. My apologies here. I'm just going to, all right, let's look at a thing. I love this. Seth Godin's a great marketing person, but he's quite an insightful man as well. The people who get things done, who lead, who grow, and who make an impact, those people have goals. And really, when we don't have goals, whether it's individually or as an organisation, it is a bit like we're frittering away the resources of our organisation. So my first strategy would be to say, if you're going to do goals, then the more you can involve your team, while it might mean taking the team, and your team might be a large team, might involve taking the team away from work for a couple of hours, the benefit throughout the quarter or the 6 months, depending on your planning cycle, that has, because everyone's on the same page, for me, is absolutely worth that investment. The other beautiful thing is, if you have multi-generational team, you have quite a diverse team in terms of experiences, nationalities, thought processes, etc., you're going to get better ideas in terms of ways we can move forward. There's a lot of research around diversity, that the more diverse insights we seek from people, the more likely we're going to come up with innovative ways to solve some of our challenges. So one of the things I would say is, as much as possible, get your team involved. If there's too many people, you might want to do it at layers, but certainly allow your team members time to actually understand how the decision making was made. I was talking to a client of mine very recently, and she was sharing, she works for a very big organisation, and she was sharing that when COVID hit, the leadership team actually started to fracture, because it was quite a big leadership team, and what used to happen is decision by a bit of consensus, so everyone was involved in that. As soon as COVID happened, a few people got stressed and went, we're going to shrink that, and we're just going to, a couple of us are going to make ideas. The problem was they weren't very good at communicating how they made those ideas. And what ended up happening is the people who weren't involved in that process, one, felt left out. That meant that they felt threatened, so they weren't sure that they really were considered a leader anymore. The other thing is, those people who were left out suddenly weren't on the same page as the rest of the leadership team. They were less able to explain to their team why they were doing particular things because they didn't have that understanding of the decision-making process. And the organisation lost a lot of time and energy because the fractured part of the leadership who weren't part of that process started trying to get certainty by asking lots of questions, or they started to withdraw and just go, well, I'm not interested anymore. So while it might have felt efficient to shrink the group, actually what it led to is a lot more miscommunication, a lot less trust, and that has slowed everything down. So when we say involve the team, when we involve people, they understand more and it increases trust. The moment we are isolated from it, we tend to start to make up stories and they're often not useful. So when you're thinking about goal setting, if people aren't involved, how do you then think about communicating why these goals were chosen, why it's important to focus on them? So giving them a little bit of that background about the, the strengths, the weaknesses, the trends, what's going on from an environmental, as in the environment around your organisation, that can at least give them some information. Just giving them here's the latest set of goals, you're very unlikely to get buy-in. And I'm going to check here in the chat box. Have you ever been in a situation where you've been given some goals, but you don't really, no explanation's been given, and you sort of, do you really buy into those goals if you're just given them? Give me a yes or a no in the chat box. We like to feel part of that group that makes those decisions. So while it seems like it might waste resources to have everyone there, then it actually saves it because everyone's on the same page. Yeah, it's really important, isn't it, to be part of those decisions. Thank you, Carol, too. Excellent. All right, let's continue. The other thing that I think is really important is I've worked with organisations and I've worked in organisations where we had the strategic priorities and we did stuff, but there was no linkage between the goals and what teams were doing. So one of the things that the OKR approach is, which is the one that John Dewar uses, is it links the tasks that you do each day to those strategic priorities. So it allows people to see, what am I doing that relates to that? Now, obviously some people do business as usual. For example, if you've got someone working in the finance area, a lot of what they'll be doing is just making sure that, bills get paid, people get paid, etc. And if there's a specific priority that requires the finance people, that will filter down to the tasks that the finance people need to do, and they can see how that links to those strategic priorities. So linking our actions is really important. One of the things that, again, the high-performing, high-growth companies do when they use this approach is they use daily and weekly huddles. So each day the team's checking in to see how they're going, and each week the team comes together, looks at what they've achieved for the previous week, celebrates that, and then looks at what do we need to do in the next week. Is there areas I'm stuck with, etc. A business that does that is the Ritz-Carlton. We've got some dear friends that work with the Ritz-Carlton, and they come together at the beginning of each shift and talk about what did I do yesterday? What do I need help with today, etc. Now, obviously that industry is being massively disrupted at the moment, but it is starting to come back. So being able to link those actions to goals is so important, because by doing that, we're not going to waste resources. People understand what they need to focus on. They don't necessarily, or they can call out the shiny objectitis approach. The other thing is, when we do this, we're able to track our progress. And often it doesn't look like we've achieved much in a week. In a month, you start to see a little bit of progress. When you're doing quarterly priorities, it's amazing the last month how much work gets done to tick off those quarterly priorities. So it is a beautiful approach. It's got a sort of end date, end of the quarter. Now, some of those priorities will continue over to the next quarter. However, we're tracking how close are we getting to them. And it's really at that detailed level, mapping it up to that strategic level. We use a particular program called Align, which does that. And when we introduced it in April with our team, because we were like, okay, we're all virtual now, let's try this out. And our team love it, because what it shows is usually the blockages in our system, myself and my husband. And that sort of, we go, oh, we better get moving because we're holding up our team. So it's a beautiful visual way of showing how we're going and if there are blockages, where they are, which is usually us. Now, in terms of delegation, so there are 2 tips in terms of goal setting. In terms of delegation, a dear friend of mine shared with me many years ago that if the other person can do it to about 70% of what you could do it, then they're ready for you to start delegating it. Because you don't want to wait till they're 100% because they're not you. But if they can do it to 70%, they're pretty close to being able to take it over. Now, obviously, some of the things we need to consider are, I could have someone who's really technically good, but they've got a really bad attitude. So if that's the case, 70% may not be the thing. We might look at the attitude. Some other things is start small. So don't give them the biggest thing you do first and give them that as a delegation. Start with some smaller things so that they can get used to how you delegate to them, and also you can get used to what works for them. One thing that I think really helps is to explore your preferences, how you like to work, but also explore their preferences and their concerns. By having that honest conversation up front, we're able to understand, okay, this is when I would come and ask questions. I've got authority about this. Great. All right, we're on the same page. Now, it doesn't mean we're not going to go back and forward the first few times. And that's why starting small often makes it a little bit easier. It is really important to understand that if you are giving them the work, you also need to give them a level of authority to be able to make decisions. However, to manage risks, you may actually say, look, this is where that authority, you need to come back to me. Yesterday, I was doing a webinar on decision making, which doesn't sound very interesting. One of the things was, I actually find it really interesting because most organisations see decisions as what's the outcome of the decision. We don't look at it as a process. So in your organisations, does everyone understand when one person can make a decision, when one person needs to consult with a group of people before they make the decision, where a group might need to look at those decisions and get consensus, or the group actually needs to vote, 75% agree before we move forward on this. So one of the things I think with delegating is thinking about what decisions are you okay with them initially making, and what decisions might they need to come back and talk to you about. The big thing is, whatever you do, do not micromanage them. Unless they really say, I want you to sit by me for the next 2 times I try this. The moment we micromanage someone, it triggers a threat response in a person's brain. There's a fabulous model called the SCARF model, and it's where social threats are triggered in us. And social threats and the SCARF model stands for status. So if someone questions your status in a social situation, it will trigger a threat. If someone, the C stands for certainty. So if there's lots of uncertainty, we get threats triggered. The A is autonomy. So when we get micromanaged, autonomy is a massive threat. We all go, no, I don't like being micromanaged. And so the moment we micromanage, we trigger that autonomy threat. We take the blood flow away from the front of the person's brain, which means this is where they need the blood flow to be so that they can take over the work and do it well from you. And we send that blood flow when we micromanage to the threat response. So we make them less capable of making a good decision. So we really don't want to micromanage if we want to help ensure that that other person is successful in what they're doing. The question that I think is really important to ask ourselves is, what's the worst thing that could happen if I delegate this? And am I comfortable with that? And by saying that out loud, what's the worst thing that could possibly happen, and am I comfortable with that? It actually forces you to think about, well, what is the worst thing that could possibly happen? And often it's not as dramatic as our brain sort of probably thought vaguely in the background, oh, I'm a bit nervous about handing this over. They might miss a deadline. They might not get it exactly the same as us. And by thinking about that and then thinking about how can you minimize those risks, it will help you delegate perhaps even better, because you're thinking of it from not just their point of view, but also your point of view. And when we get it right, it allows us to step up. In terms of delegation, I'm curious, because this is an area I think that other people have great tips as well. What's the best thing you've seen in terms of people being able to delegate that makes it really effective? So in the chat box, I'd love for you to share. I'm just going to have a drink of water while you do that. No, doesn't look like anyone's got any. Just thought I'd check. Ah, beautiful. Planned one-on-ones. That's beautiful. And in fact, Russell, one of the things we know, there was a report released a couple of weeks ago, and they were saying that burnout rates across the world are going off the charts with employees because of all this disruption. And one of the things that helps with delegation, but it also helps reduce burnout, is one-on-ones. Carol, no, I can't see your response. How weird's that? Oh, yes, I did. Sorry, I missed that entirely. Thank you. You can minimise those risks by letting the person know deadlines. Yeah, we need to meet. Absolutely. Thank you, Carol. So the one-on-ones, just coming back to Russell's point, when we do them once a month, it reduces burnout in our people by about 30%. When we do it once a fortnight, it reduces the likelihood of burnout in our people by 84%. Isn't it an astonishing thing? So not only does it help with delegation, but it also helps with our staff's mental health and well-being. So I would, yeah, I know, it's astonishing, isn't it, Russell? It's an amazing thing, that because what it says when we have those one-on-ones is, one, it gives the person the opportunity to ask questions, to clarify, etc. And also because we're taking the time and the effort to sit one-on-one with people, they feel like they matter more, which they do. And it's a really lovely way of showing that they matter. So you got a tip around culture and burnout as well on a delegation and goal setting webinar. Now, the last strategy that I wanted to share is around success. So, Carol's point around making sure that people are aware of their deadlines is really important. We don't want to, set people up for failure. So if you think about it, if it takes me, say, 3 days to do that particular task, I can't assume when I hand that task over to a new person that it's going to take them 3 days. It's probably going to take them maybe 6 days to start with, just to wrap their head around something. If it's 3 days doing, it's probably quite complicated. So we need to think about, before we hand over to the other person, what does success look like? So, what needs to happen for it to be successful? How are you going to measure that it is successful? What is the timeline or the deadlines that people need to meet? And this is why I think starting small really helps us, because we can do the continuous improvement loop where they do some, they come back, we check in, yep, great. And we get to understand how we like to work together. And then you increase what that task might be. And it might be a new task, but you've now got a bit of feedback about what works for you and what works for them. And we loop that into the feedback so that the next time we delegate, we take that feedback into account and improve to help make it more successful, both from our perspective and their perspective. The other thing that we know that is likely to encourage them to really stay focused on it, and also for us as a way of motivating us to let go a little bit, is when they do get those little wins, we should celebrate them. So the success is measuring success, and it's also celebrating the success. So the moment they go, yes, I've got that, yeah. Now what this does, I know I look silly, what this does is, one, it makes both people smile. It also gives us a hit of dopamine. And when we get that hit of dopamine, dopamine is the chemical in our bloodstream that actually makes us take action. So what used to happen when people built habits or took on new tasks is we would often beat ourselves up for what we didn't get right. We now know that's the worst thing we can do, because the moment we start beating ourselves up, or the other person because they haven't got it right, that releases the not feel good chemicals. So adrenaline, cortisol, which works against our brain. So that strips blood flow from the thinking part of our brain to the threat part, which means we're less capable of achieving things and we don't feel good. So we now understand why many people have failed to achieve New Year's resolutions. If instead, and the science is really clear on this, if I've delegated something to someone and they've done a good job, it doesn't have to be my way, it can be, their way of doing it, and we do a celebration together, I feel good because I've watched them achieve more and they feel good and they'll want to take more action. So historically, we've often got feedback about what we didn't do right and we never celebrated the stuff we did do right. If we want to do delegation well, and also goals, the moment we start doing the celebration, we actually increase the likelihood of more action and more focused action. So celebrating is really important. So identify what success looks like, sounds like, the deadlines, etc. And then as they're achieved, celebrate them, party. And it may mean when you are delegating particular tasks, you might need to break it down first. One of the things I also know, and this is not so much on success, although it helps us achieve success, is if the other person is struggling, so the person you've given the task to, and they're enthusiastic about it, we need to look at, do they have the right skills? And is it how I'm communicating what needs to be delegated? Because most of us, when we're that good that we can delegate the task, there's a lot of stuff that we do unconsciously. So we're unconsciously competent. To give you an example of what that is, if you drive a car and have driven a car for a long time, I'm sure there are times when you're driving, you get to a place and you go, oh, I don't remember half of that trip. You don't have to consciously think about, I need to put the foot on the brake or I need to turn my headlights on. All of that happens automatically because you've done that thing so many times that you are unconsciously competent. One of the things that people don't realize is when they're explaining this is what you need to do, there's a whole stack of stuff that's happened in that person's brain who's explaining it that they may not actually be sharing with the person who is just starting to learn it. And they will be more in that they need that conscious information. So it really is thinking about sometimes explaining it, letting them go away and come back and seeing what questions. And that's why smaller to start with helps, because you get to understand each other and they'll get to learn what questions should I be asking in order to make sure that I have got that unconscious information that we've got because we're good at that particular task. Now, you know I love quotes, so here we go. Our goals can only be reached through a vehicle of a plan, and in which we must fervently believe and upon which we must vigorously act. There is no other route to success. That's good old Pablo Picasso. When we don't have a plan, it is very unlikely we have goals. If we don't have goals, it's very likely we will waste resources, time, energy, people's time, their energy, etc. And when we have goals, hopefully part of our goals as we move up in an organisation is actually how do we delegate? How do we learn to give away these tasks that are more operational, provide them to others or share them with others so that they can grow and we can move into the more strategic level. So I'm curious, what are some of your takeaways from today's webinar? And then I've got some resources I'm going to share with you. What are you going to do differently or what might you think about slightly differently after today's webinar, other than remembering to put the slides up before you start the webinar, which Carol will get. Beautiful, Carol. To be clear with your direction when you're delegating. Excellent. Fabulous, Russell. I love that. Need to take my team lunch. Yeah, regional Victoria. I hope it all starts getting a little bit better. My parents are in regional Victoria too. So, and yeah, it's not fun. But the moment we can, and even if it's a virtual lunch, that can be a way of just celebrating and helping them step up to that next level. Now, At the end of slides, and you will get a recording of this webinar, there is also at the end of the slides a number of resources around goal setting and delegation skills. So, and if you need more, please feel free to reach out. More than happy to help. Next month, we're going to be looking at creativity and innovation. This is something that I think through disruption is really important for all of us to think about how we can utilise creativity and innovation to do our roles differently and also help our organisations.